All right, we're going to talk a little bit about textures and materials and the difference between the two, how we use them, and how materials are applied to both brushes or the geometry in the scene, like the ground plane in this particular case, and then that box, which is an asset. It's a model from a 3D program that has been brought in. Applying materials to those two objects is a little bit different. But I want to start with textures. The vocabulary that we're going to use, and I'm as bad as anybody. I've been around 3D so long. To me, a texture is something that you put on an object to make it look realistic. Strictly speaking, when we're dealing with the Unreal Engine, that's not true. A texture doesn't go on an object. A material goes on an object, and the material is made up of a texture or textures. There can be multiple textures within a material. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about here, because you need to understand all of the different things that are available to us as artists when we're doing the things we need to do. Now, I'm going to bring in a little note right here to help us look at this. And what we're going to talk about here in terms of textures first. Materials I'm going to handle in the next video. But for textures, we're going to talk about the size of a texture to use. We're going to talk about the various formats that are best for use in Unreal and why. And then we're going to talk about the main types of textures that we're going to be dealing with. And we almost always deal with multiples within a material. There are multiple textures. We have normal maps, we have a diffuse map, we have a specular map, we have ambient occlusion, we have opacity. We'll describe what all of those are and show you how they all work. And then after you understand how those things work, then we'll go back, and like I said in the next video, and we'll create some materials so you can see how they work. Materials are a little bit more complicated than just a collection of textures. So the first thing we want to look at is powers of 2. Now, what does that mean? So let me bring Photoshop over here so we can take a look at it. Almost all of the textures that we deal with are square. They are square, and they are in the powers of 2. And if you don't know the powers of 2 from your math classes, 2 by 2, 4 by 4, 8 by 8, 16 by 16, 24 is a power of 2, 24th, what else is a power of 2? 64, or 48 is a power of 2, 64, 128 is a power of 2, 256, 512, 1024, 2048, 4096 by 4096. Those are all powers of 2. That is what Unreal likes to have in terms of the size of a texture. Now, when you're creating your own textures in Photoshop, you usually don't pay attention to that. If you're downloading images off the web, more than likely they're not a power of 2. You need to make sure that adjustments are made to those images so they will indeed work. Now, it used to be Unreal, if you tried to bring in a texture that was not a power of 2, you got a warning and it said it wouldn't do it. Now, I believe in the newer version, it will try and make an adjustment to it, and it'll try to make it fit, and it'll bring it in. But you want to make sure it's a power of 2, and that's because of the way that the engine is going to look at it. It's going to convert it. If you brought in an image, let's say, instead of 512 by 512 pixels, you brought in one that was 420 by 420. What it's going to do is it's going to blow it up to the size of 512 by 512, and the image quality is going to go down. You want to make sure you keep your image quality as high as possible. Now, this image right here, if I look at it in Photoshop, this is a clay, no, it's not a clay image, what is it? It's a gravel. The image size on this is 2048 by 2048. Now, the ideal size, and that's roughly 28 inches by 28 inches in terms of the size of that image itself. That is an extremely large texture. And if you're going to have a big world and you're going to have a lot of objects and a lot of materials, and all of your textures are 2048 by 2048, you're using up a tremendous amount of memory for something that isn't going to show. The ideal sizes are 512 by 512, or if you really are concerned about the size of something, you want to make it 1024 by 1024. and that's pixels. The resolution must be 72 pixels per inch, and you see it right there on the screen. If you download something from the web, it might be 72.009, oddly enough, or it might be 96. It doesn't matter. It has to be 72, and you're going to have access to a program like Photoshop to make sure that your images are the correct size and that they are the correct resolution. So keep that in mind. 512 by 512, 1024 by 1024. Canvas does have a list of available sizes and formats. All of the information I'm covering today is available also in Canvas, so you can go back and review that and take a look at it when you want to. You want to make sure that that's done. Now, the formats that we use. Okay, let me cancel that. The formats that we use in here are a PNG file, a PNG, a Targa file, which is TGA, JPEG, or a PSD, which is a raw Photoshop file. Why do we need to use those particular formats? Well, Unreal will, I believe Unreal will allow you to bring in more than that. Let me get this out of the way just for a moment. And let me go in here and import the game. And we'll look and see. There's a whole list of file formats in here that Unreal will bring in. And let's see if I can see in there ones that we might want to use. I can bring in an AVI or a FBX file. There's a Targa file, wave files, MP4s, object files, sound waves. All of those things are the formats that we can bring in. In terms of dealing with textures, PNG, Targa, JPEG, and Photoshop are primary. You have Photoshop files. The thing about a Photoshop file is it can be in layers, and when you bring it in, all of the layers will remain intact. So if you've built a complex material made up of multiple layers, and then you just saved it up as a PSD file, you can bring it in. Unreal will bring it in. It doesn't really like it because it's not a flattened image, and it would prefer to have a flattened image that's just one layer. Like this is just a background layer. That's all it is. If I were to click on this and add another layer to it, and then go and get my paintbrush and say, well, let's do this, and then I can save this up and bring it in, and I can always come back and remove that thing later. But it would really prefer that we didn't do that, and that it would prefer to have a layer that, or an image that is flattened. So PSD, while it can be imported, is not its favorite. PNGs and Targas. The importance about a PNG file or a Targa file. Bring this back over here. The thing that's really important about these two formats right here is that they allow for opacity and they allow for illumination. Okay, so a Targa file or a PNG file, I can say, well, here's what I want. I want to create some plants, and I've got some leaves painted, and I don't want the background to show up. I just want the leaves to show up. Well, if I use a PNG file or a Targa file, I can separate leaves and flowers from the background and then remove the background. Okay. Basically, it is an uncollapsed file. That means that you can have a blank background and you can just have some images painted on that blank background. A JPEG has a white background or a solid color background, and you can't do opacity, and you can't use it for those types of things. But PNGs and Targas are ideal for that. They're also they are smaller in file size, but they maintain their quality because they're not an image that is optimized. So the JPEG file is compressed, and you lose data on a compressed image. Targas and PNGs are uncompressed, but they're a relatively small file size, so they work really well. So those are going to be the two that we primarily work with, and almost everything I give you is going to be in a PNG or TGA file format. Now, the types of textures that we bring in: diffuse or albedo, and I'll talk to you in materials about albedo. Specular. Specular has to do with shininess. Normal maps are what make things look three-dimensional, and I'll show you a normal map here in a second. Ambient occlusion is, think of it as a dirt layer. When we model things or when we build things, we build them to look used, and we can use an ambient occlusion map to add what looks like, you know, a crust or dirt in the in cracks and seams and crevices of a particular model. So it's really kind of a nice thing to have access to. And I'm going to be giving you a program that's free that will allow you to create these things on your own. And then opacity mask. And opacity or illumination is the same thing, depending upon what you're trying to do. That is what we can make transparent as part of a regular model. And remember, like I said, PGA or TGA and PNGs can have opacity built into them. So I can go in and use that to knock out a background or knock out or make a window see-through, things like that. All right, now let's go back to Photoshop here and look at these. So this is a texture. It is dirt and gravel, and it's kind of a procedural image that was created in Photoshop. And then this is a normal map. This is the same thing. And what you see is the normal map is a funny color. We used to use something called a bump map, and a bump map is black and white. And the way that it would work is an area that was white was raised up, and an area that was black was pushed down. So what was called a bump map, you can make certain things look like they're elevated, or certain things look like they're recessed, like windows or seams around doors, or car door seams, things like that, a dent or a mark. Then we came up with something called a normal map, which actually contains something different. A bump map, just being black and white, can't do a whole lot in terms of represent anything other than up or down. This one contains red, green, and blue colors, which gives us this weird bluish, purplish format. And what that does is it raises elements based off of the X, Y, and Z pivots. So things that are red are raised up, things that are blue are pushed to the side, things that are green are pushed up or down. So you get that really nice effect going on, and it really makes a flat object look like it's three-dimensional. And I got more of them here. I've got clay, bricks, and then you look at the target file, the normal map, and you can see these areas in through here. What looks like raised out grout is actually recessed grout. So the bricks will be flat, and then the grout will look like it's pushed in once I do that one. Okay, a basic image looks like this window here, and an opacity would be this. What is black is see-through, and what is white is going to be this image right here. So everything you see in here would show up in the engine, except in the material if I made that with opacity. And then there's something a little bit different, and that's emissive. Emissive is the opposite of that. White is going to glow, black is not going to glow. So I can make the windows not only see-through, I can actually go in and make it look like there's light being emitted through those windows. Now these, I believe, are all target files. And here in just a second, when I go in and show you the material editor and we actually start creating materials, you'll see how these things then all come together. But that's kind of what you have to know. Now, when you go to import pictures in, the textures in, what I like to do is I like to create a folder. What I did was I just right-clicked down here. Come on. Right-click in here in this window, and then I just selected Create New Folder, and then that added the new folder in there. And then what I did was named it Textures, and then I imported the textures actually in here. And for whatever reason, it's not doing anything right now. It's going to have to catch up to me. So that's how I did it. And then what you'll do is you'll also right-click again, and let's see if I can get this thing to work. I'm going to pause just for a second. Well, it appears my Unreal is frozen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and stop this video, and then in the next video about materials, I'll show you how to actually import those textures in there, and how you can get a basic material set up, and then we'll talk about applying the materials to the various objects.